What is up, YouTube? I'm Devon DaVinci, leader of the Renaissance crew, and you're watching DaVinci Reacts. Today, I have a very interesting video reaction for you guys. Now, if you're a sports fan, then obviously you've heard the discussion of GOATs. And for those of you that don't know what GOAT means, it's just an abbreviation for greatest of all time. Pretty much to determine who is the best in any particular thing. You can have many different things. You can have the GOAT of a particular category of statistics in sports, the GOAT of a particular decade, the GOAT of a particular team, the GOAT of, well, you can't have a GOAT of a decade. That's rather is kind of a contradiction. But you can have, like I said, GOATs of particular teams, GOATs of particular statistics, GOATs in general. And I'm sure everybody has had a discussion about this at one point or another if you're a sports fan. Now, this video that I'm going to do a reaction to is from a channel called Nonstop Sports. I believe I've done a reaction to one of their videos before. So I will have a link for their channel at the end of this video. The last 30 seconds, you'll see an icon pop up over here. Click on it. It'll take you to their channel. You can watch their videos, subscribe, like, all the other good stuff. And I will have a link in the description box that will take you to this original video. That has many purposes. If you haven't seen this video already, I recommend you watch the original first by using that link, and then coming back and watching the reaction second. If you don't want to watch the video twice, what I recommend is opening the original video in a new window or tab, putting it on mute, and having it play in the background while you watch my video. By the time my video ends, their video will end. You'll get both of us a view. If you're a reactor yourself and you're looking for a link, because I know sometimes it's tough finding links for particular videos because there are so many reaction channels doing reactions and stuff. A lot of times they don't leave the original link. Go to the description box. There's the link. Do your thing. Now, with that being said, let's jump in this and see what it has to offer. I will be listing off who I think the GOATs of particular sports are. And because the name of this video is Who's the GOAT in Every Major Sport, I'm going to imagine it's probably going to be talking about North American sports. So the general stuff like basketball, baseball, soccer / football, football / American football, boxing, maybe hockey, things like that. I will go ahead and give you guys a good idea of what I think the GOATs are in those areas. I'm not an expert in everything, obviously. I don't know. I'm good at certain sports. But even the ones that I'm not good at, I think I've heard enough recognizable names that I can at least give you an idea. And if you think that I'm dead wrong, then go in the comment section and let me know. Anyway, let's go check this out.
Calling somebody a GOAT used to be an insult. Today, it's the highest praise, and there are not many GOATs out there. Who's the greatest of all time is a popular debate in many barbershops, school halls, office spaces, and TV panels. And without further ado, here's our take on
gives the
sports
category
greatest.
first before naming the person. That way I can give
Football,
a guess first.
Leo
All right.
Messi. For all Cristiano
Messi.
Ronaldo fans out there, please realize that I too love Cristiano and that he's definitely in this conversation because he sustained greatness for 17 years and counting. If you wanted to make a case for Cristiano, you could, because he has won gold with Portugal and is superior to Messi in certain aspects of the game. The most obvious example is aerial play, simply because he is taller and has supreme athleticism. Ronaldo's sprints without the ball are also unmatched in football, and his dedication to the sport is second to none. All that being said, I'd still give a slight nod to Messi. 2 years younger, he has an equally sustained level of world-class play ever since he stepped onto the scene in 2005. And if there was one word to describe Messi, it would be genius. His dribbling, finishing, ball control, and feel for the game are the things we haven't seen before or since. Nobody does what he can do. When he runs with the ball, it sticks to his feet, and it almost seems like he's faster with it than without it. He also became one of the best playmakers in the game, and probably the best free kick taker. Yes, he's never won gold with the national team, but he was a part of some poorly managed teams, even though he was clearly the best player on the pitch. Honorable mention goes to the original Ronaldo, who was equally as good at his peak as Messi and Cristiano. It's just that his peak was cut short due to multiple knee injuries. And also to Pele, who was considered the GOAT for a long time, but both Ronaldo and Messi will exceed his official goal tally, and will do so in modern football. which is probably 10 times faster and more complex than the football in the 1950s.
See, I was gonna go with Pele. I'm not. I don't know a lot about football or soccer. Forgive me for calling it soccer. It's just what I grew up calling it. I didn't know a lot about it. The only name that I really recognized, like before I even knew anything about soccer, was Pele. That was the name that I knew. So that was the one I tend to associate with greatest of all time. Now, Ronaldo and Messi are names that I've heard also. So obviously they have mainstream recognition. But I didn't know anything about their statistics. So it is interesting, like seeing, like I didn't even know Ronaldo played this long, 17 years. Like they said, he's 17 years in. I didn't know he played that long, and I honestly didn't expect soccer careers to go that long because that's a big ass soccer field, and you're running back and forth constantly, like nonstop running. Like that's probably like the ultimate cardio sport as far as uh, endurance. Like those fields are gigantic. So to think that someone is doing that for 17 years is crazy. But then again, I don't know how many games in a season that the team plays. So for all I know, is it could be a small amount of games, so it's maybe not that bad. But then again, it could be like baseball where you just have like 100+ games, and it's like I have no idea what to grab onto. So I was assuming Pele. If you guys have an opinion on who the GOAT of soccer is, go in the comment section and let me know. And please explain it for someone that's not that deep into soccer. Like, give me a good explanation for why they're the GOAT compared to other recognizable stars.
Basketball. Michael Jordan. If you
Of
ask
course.
100 people who is the GOAT of basketball, some people will say it's LeBron, some will say it's Kareem, while others will put Bill Russell in the front because he has the most rings. However, most of them will say the greatest basketball player who ever walked the face of the earth was Michael Jeffrey Jordan.
Yes.
MJ has everything needed for the GOAT argument. He's got the titles, he's got the MVPs. Some people have better stats, but that's more due to the quantity of seasons in which they played than the difference in quality. Jordan was equally good offensively and defensively. He was an athletic demigod, but still extremely fundamentally sound. He had the handles, he had the shooting touch, and could stay in the air longer than anybody. There were absolutely no deficiencies in his game. All that was complemented with overwhelming passion for the game, larger-than-life charisma, and a huge impact on the sport globally, which MJ brought to heights never reached before. Like President Obama said when he gave MJ the Presidential Medal of Freedom, there is a reason why they call somebody the Michael Jordan of their profession, if they are the best at what they do.
Yes, I agree with it. Michael Jordan is 100% the greatest player of all time in basketball. What people don't understand about Mike is not only was he the best offensive player, not just from the time, like during the time he played, but all time, but he's also arguably one of the greatest defensive players of all time. And that's something that you can't say about a lot of other players. Like, you just can't. Like, a lot of people want to compare LeBron James to Michael Jordan. And it's like, LeBron, like, where he ranks all time is pretty heavily stacked on his offensive game. Because I don't think anybody would say that LeBron James is one of the greatest defensive players all time. I just don't think they would. Whereas with Michael Jordan, it's like when you talk about outside, like perimeter defenders, he's in the top 3 easily. It'd be him, Gary Payton, and who else would you want to put up there? I don't even know. That Gary Payton's the only person I would compare to Michael Jordan as far as perimeter defense. And then on top of that, you take the fact that he had natural talents, his athleticism, his size, the size of his hands, his speed, and like everything. And then you throw on top of that, he was fundamentally sound. This is somebody, like, normally when players in especially in basketball, are like blessed with natural abilities like athleticism and stuff like that, they tend to rest on those laurels. Like, they tend to let their speed and athletic ability determine their play style. And once they get older and those things start to die down, they become a shell of what they used to be. Whereas Mike, he was somebody that was given the gifts naturally, but still said, no, I want more. And he went even harder and practiced even harder to be even better when he didn't have to, because he was already naturally great. His mindset, the idea that he pushed himself at all times to be the best that he could possibly be in every single area. If he had a weakness, he worked on it day and night until he perfected it. The only person I would say that has a harder work ethic than Michael Jordan is Kobe Bryant. That's it. And it's like, with all that stuff in Michael Jordan's favor, like, or all that stuff in Michael Jordan's bag of tricks, to have all that at once makes him the greatest. There's never been a player with all those attributes in one.
Hockey. Wayne Gretzky. What Lionel Messi is in football, Wayne Gretzky is in hockey. Smaller than everyone, but better than everyone as well. Gretzky came to the league in 1979 and immediately won an MVP award, which he will then claim for 8 seasons straight. He's the leading scorer in NHL history and has more
MVP?
Goals, assists, and hat tricks than any other player. He won 4 Stanley Cups as a member of the Edmonton Oilers and is credited to change the game of hockey forever. More team-oriented play, constructed around finding the open space and letting the power of the pass rule the game, is all tied to Gretzky. Most sports have these heartfelt debates around who's the GOAT, Messi or Ronaldo, LeBron or Jordan, Brady or Montana. In hockey, there is little to no debate. The greatest player ever to put on skates is Wayne Gretzky.
See, if hockey was more internationally, what's the best way to say it? If hockey was more internationally accepted, like how basketball, baseball, soccer, sports like that were, Wayne Gretzky would probably be like an automatic recognized GOAT as far as like just in general. Like when people talk about like greatest players of all time, usually the first things you think of are like Tiger Woods and Michael Jordan. And the reason you think of those players is because of how far they are compared to the people that are in their are behind them. Like the gap between them and number 2 is so dramatic. You use them as the example when you're talking about GOATs. Wayne Gretzky, from what it sounds like, he has an even bigger gap than they do between him and who number 2 is. But I let me just make it personal. I've never heard anybody mention him on that same level, despite the fact that it sounds like he is just the most dominant hockey player of all time. Obviously, he's a name that I recognize, even though I know nothing about hockey. Like, the only other hockey player I've ever heard of in my entire life is there's a player whose last name is Crosby. That's it. That's the only other player I've ever heard of. Of all the hockey players of all time, that's the only other player I've heard of. The Mighty Ducks. That's the only thing I recognize about the sport. But Wayne Gretzky, I know for sure. Like, that's a name that I've heard throughout my entire life. People would have to let me know. I'm gonna go look up more on Wayne Gretzky if I can manage to remember to do that, because sometimes when I'm recording in bulk, it tends to slip my mind. But if I do forget it, just leave it in the comment section anyway. If you're a fan of Wayne Gretzky, let me know just how dominant this dude was. Like, just list the feats off that just would make other sports figures seem weak. Like, for example, the 8-time MVP, if that's what the person said. That is something to list. Okay, he's an 8-time MVP. And then just drop the mic. Like, that's it. But, yeah, I'm going to have to check out more on Wayne Gretzky.
Boxing. Muhammad Ali. In the modern era, there have been many heavyweights that would give Ali problems due to their superior size or strength. Prime Mike Tyson needed just one punch to send you to sleep, and even Ali himself admitted he would probably knock him out.
I'll give you my
Heavyweight
opinions on
greats
this
like Lewis, Klitschko, or Tyson Fury all have a significant height and reach advantage over Ali, and it would be tough for him to beat them. Floyd Mayweather has the undefeated record going for him in the GOAT conversation, and Sugar Ray Robinson has the number of victories. But whatever each boxer does, from now until the end of time, Muhammad Ali will still be the greatest. He's still the most known boxer ever, even though his career finished almost 40 years ago. His fight for human rights, legendary trash talk, unbelievable smarts, and silky smooth footwork made Ali the greatest champion in boxing history. There may have been better fighters than him, but Ali is the greatest.
Okay. When it comes to Ali, for me, I have him listed as the greatest heavyweight boxer of all time. But when you're talking about the greatest boxer of all time in general, my vote goes to Sugar Ray Robinson. The dude, like, everybody wants to talk about Floyd Mayweather and his 50 fights without losing a fight or whatever. But the thing is, with his record, a lot of his fights were, let's say, he picked a lot of people that he knew he had an advantage against. And it seemed like he was focused more on trying to prolong that streak as opposed to fighting the best fighter. But with Sugar Ray Robinson, I believe he was over 90 wins before he lost his first fight. So if he would have retired early, he would have had a streak that was way, or he would have had a record that was way more impressive. Because to me, his record is still more impressive than Floyd Mayweather's. But he would have had a record more impressive than Floyd's as far as the undefeated thing. Ali, if you're talking about, see, this is interesting because if we're talking about just in the ring, like just the sport itself, then there are fighters that could make the claim for being greater than Muhammad Ali. But when you take everything into consideration, the context around his career, what happened inside the ring, what happened outside the ring, personality, take the intangibles like drive and heart and motivations, will to succeed, like all that stuff, you put all that together, then that's when Muhammad Ali becomes the greatest fighter of all time, in my opinion. Just the stuff that the things that were stacked against him and what he overcame, not just in the ring but outside the ring. Also, you take that, then you compare everybody. That makes Muhammad Ali the greatest of all time. But if we're talking about just in the ring by themselves, I still consider Ali to be the greatest heavyweight of all time. But I give my vote to Sugar Ray Robinson as the greatest of any weight class.
MMA, John Jones. Now, in the MMA, unlike other sports on the list, there are multiple people that could claim the GOAT moniker, and it's more complicated to name just one person. First, we had Fedor Emelianenko, the Russian heavyweight who has been undefeated for 10 years in Pride and is an absolute legend of the sport. Then came Georges St. Pierre, who did get beaten only twice in his career, avenged both his losses, and has ruled the welterweight division for almost a decade. And then 4 years after his retirement, he captured the gold in middleweight as well. GSP had an incredible fighting IQ and was extremely well versed in all aspects of MMA and could win fights with his stand-up, ground game, or endurance. Demetrius Johnson is another fighter of the same ilk, and as far as skill set goes, he doesn't have to look up to anybody, and his 6-year UFC reign produced some of the most spectacular and breathtaking finishes we've ever seen. Wow. Anderson Silva could also be the GOAT, as he is probably the best striker that ever lived. His technique was flawless, and he had flair for days. Prime Anderson was an unsolvable mystery for every middleweight in the world, and he holds the record for the longest title reign in UFC history at 2,457 days, with 16 consecutive wins during that stretch. And even though all these guys are worthy of the GOAT title, we had to go with John Jones. When we are talking performance, then John Jones is the greatest, simply because the man has never been beaten in the octagon and is arguably the most complete and most talented fighter ever.
I was trying to I saw the fizz
PED and out-of-sport scandals aside, when that octagon door closed behind him, Johnny Bones has defeated every single opponent that came in there with him, and that's why he's the best ever.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, Anderson Silva is good, but he loses a lot of points when you take into consideration his leg folded like an accordion during that one fight. That's something that it takes a lot of points away. Speaking of which, shout out to Eminem with one of the greatest set of bars in history in Caterpillar when he mentioned the leg thing. That was damn. Man, I gotta go check out more of Eminem's Kamikaze album. That's the only song I've listened to of that entire album, and there's a ton of other ones, and people have talked about them, but I haven't actually listened to anything. So maybe if you guys know a particular song, you can give me a recommendation. But MMA is interesting because MMA careers aren't that long. Like, they're not. You can make it to the Hall of Fame after like 13 fights. And then you take into consideration weight classes and everything else. I did not know John Jones was undefeated. If he is undefeated, then in my opinion, that does make him greatest of all time, because a lot of times MMA records look just like, they're comparable to like baseball records, where a team can be just barely over 500 and still be considered a great team. MMA is like, you can be like 12-7 and be considered a Hall of Famer, and it's like, I don't know. But if he is undefeated, then yeah, that to me, that throws him over top. Emelianenko was someone that I originally would have thought, like, if somebody said who's the GOAT of MMA, I would think of Emelianenko. Now, I don't know anything about like the context for his career. Like, I don't know if he was like picking and choosing his opponents or anything like that, if he was going against weaker competition, because I know he never fought for UFC. So I mean, I don't know what the level of competition was between UFC's roster and Strikeforce's roster, or whatever the leagues he fought in were. So I would need context around that. And then there's also like I wouldn't call it a scandal, but I've heard that he's like really close with Vladimir Putin, and it's maybe it's possible that he could have gotten some advantages because of that connection. Now, that could be 100% wrong, and if it is, let me know in the comment section. But MMA is something that I'm kind of iffy on as far as my knowledge. It's like, I'll watch it every once in a while, like if there's a big event happening, but I don't really sit and watch the entire, like, I don't watch every fight, so I don't know a lot of the smaller details about the sport. So there's probably things that would throw some other fighter over the top that I just wouldn't recognize, because like, oh, I didn't think about that statistic or whatever. But let's continue.
Football, Tom Brady. Joe Montana versus Tom Brady debate is similar to LeBron versus MJ. Legend of the past, with some stricter rules and more physical play, versus the modern version, who has longevity and recency on his side. However, Brady also has 6 rings compared to Montana's 4. Even though he played in the best organization, with the best coach, and some all-time great teammates, it's fair to say that he surpassed Montana, and that his 6th championship was the clincher. In the history of football, there has never been a field general so consistent, with both individual achievements and team success intertwined. 6-time Super Bowl champion, 4-time Super Bowl MVP, 3 NFL MVP awards, 20 years of dominance. The numbers speak for themselves, and that's why Tom Brady is the GOAT. Squeaky clean image, great golf game, and Giselle are the icing to Brady's cake.
Clean.
Baseball.
Okay. As far as Tom Brady's concerned, there's a lot of asterisks in that in that category. With all the cheating scandals that the Patriots and stuff have gotten involved in, with Deflategate and the situation where the Patriots were recording opponents' practices in order to like in order to get their playbook pretty much. Um, there's a lot of things that are very iffy with football. Also, football is another interesting. It's interesting as far as GOAT discussion because you can be a great football player but never win because of how the sport is set up. It's a lot more team driven than other sports. Like you could be like I said, you could be the greatest ever, but if the defense isn't good, you're going to lose every single time. It doesn't matter how great you are. um, like one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, I consider the greatest quarterback of all time was someone that never won a championship, and that was Dan Marino. I considered him the GOAT of quarterbacks. um, the greatest football player of all time, I always associated with Jerry Rice. I thought he was the greatest football player of all time. Um, I did eventually change my opinion to Tom Brady. Now I think Tom Brady is the greatest of all time, but I still put them asterisks, and it's still rather neck and neck with Jerry Rice as far as my opinion goes because of, again, the scandals and stuff, and whether or not he could have won if those scandals weren't happening in his favor. But, I mean, he's still a great player, and he's still, if not number one, number two all time for sure. Now, baseball.
Babe Ruth. In the case of Pele in football, or Bill Russell in basketball, their birth certificate is held against them in the GOAT conversation. Yes, Pele scored 700-plus goals, but he did it against low-level clubs 50 years ago, against people who had regular jobs. The same is true for Bill Russell and his 11 NBA rings. However, when it comes to baseball, Babe Ruth is still considered the greatest, even though there are not many people alive today who have seen him play. Yes, he did play when segregation was in place, and his competition was far away from current athletes' capabilities. But still, he was the best player of his era by a wide margin, and he still holds some of the all-time records in baseball. Ruth is Major League Baseball's all-time leader in career WAR, wins above replacement, a stat that is translatable to any era. The Great Bambino is also the all-time leader in slugging percentage, .690, and on-base plus slugging, 1.164. He's second in runs batted in 2,214, and on-base percentage, and third all-time in home runs. Outside of being a world-class slugger, he was also a dominant pitcher, which sets him apart from other great hitters like Barry Bonds or Willie Mays. Ruth is a 7-time World Series winner. He was the most popular sports figure of his time, and a player who is arguably more dominant over his sport than any other athlete since.
See, I wish it would just like name the category and then move over to the person they associate with the category. That way it'd be easier for me to pause. And I could speculate ahead of time. But it's weird when you try to compare GOATs when you're talking about different eras, because it's like the further back you go, the more points are stacked against you. Like, for example, in basketball, for me, Bill Russell loses a lot of points because he played in a time when there was only a handful of teams compared to now there are 30 teams competing for championships, whereas back then there was only 8. You talk about the fact that there was no free agency back then, so whatever team you were drafted by was the team you stuck with your entire career unless they decided to trade you or if you decided to retire. So if you had a great team, you were just on a great team. And that's what the Celtics were back in the 60s. They were, without a doubt, the greatest team in the sport. And even though Bill Russell was the best player on that team, if you took him off that team was still winning multiple championships by themselves. Like, that's how great of a team that was. That was like literally a dream team in a time when each team only had like a couple of great players. I forgot. Oh, he was talking about Pele. I was thinking about the other player he mentioned, Pele. Again, I don't know the context of soccer, so I don't know anything about, like how I mentioned with Bill Russell about like the context behind it, like how many teams he played against and all these other. I don't know the context about Pele, so I can't speculate whether or not he's deserving of the GOAT discussion. I always knew him just simply off of name recognition, so I'll leave that for the soccer fans who know a lot about it to talk about that. Um, Babe Ruth, again, he does lose some points when it comes to the time he played because of the lack of segregation. So he wasn't playing against black or Latin players. So it's like that takes a lot of points away. Especially considering that at the time the Negro Leagues had a lot of great players. Like Satchel Paige was someone that, well, he's like 50 years old. He was like 40 or 50 when he finally got to the NBA, or wow, NBA, the MLB, and he was still like an all-star caliber player. Um, Also, that's another thing when you take into consideration for baseball. Like we always put so many, we always put so much attention towards batting and home runs and things like that. But it's like, what about the other things like pitching or being an outfielder or something like that? Like, I'm sure there are players that were more recognized on that side of the field that might have an even bigger gap between them and number two than Babe Ruth does as far as batting. But because that area doesn't get a lot of as much attention, they kind of get swept under the rug. So I'm wondering, like, for those people that are really big into baseball, let me know who you consider to be the greatest of all time. Because I know some people will say that Babe Ruth has a run for his money. You have Hank Aaron. I don't put Barry Bonds or any of those other sluggers from the 90s up in that conversation because of the steroid thing going on. Um, Only person I compare with Babe Ruth is Hank Aaron. There could be some players nowadays that are some sluggers that might be drawing attention, but I kind of doubt it because again, I'm somebody that wasn't a big baseball fan, but even I knew about like the Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa home run back and forth they were having in the 90s. And I didn't watch baseball, but I was aware of that happening because it was such big news. So I would imagine if there was somebody that was competing with that, there would be some type of attention being drawn to it. But I haven't really heard anything from any particular players. Nowadays, it's like the best baseball players are more all-around players. Like they're not the all-time greatest when it comes to slugging or whatever else, but they're they're great players when it comes to batting. They're great players when it comes to playing the field. They're great players when it comes to like all this extra stuff. So it's like they're more like jack of all trades as opposed to being aces in one particular category. But yeah, if you're a baseball fan, you'd have to let me know. Like, where exactly do you rank Babe Ruth? What type of context do you put into his career, his statistics, his competition, the time he played, things like that. Um, I do give him points for this, considering the time he played, what he was able to do as far as the numbers he was able to do and stuff. And again, I don't know like how big the stadiums were, so maybe they were smaller back then, so it was easier to get a home run. But if they weren't, and they're playing in stadiums that are pretty much the same as they are now, the dude was able to do all that stuff off of hot dogs and cigars. Like he had no. I'm willing to guarantee Babe Ruth had no nutritional guide or some type of athletic workout program or regimen that he did. So it's like this is a dude that woke up, had a steak and a cigar, and went to the damn batting cages and then went on to play the game, came home, got a glass of gin, and went to sleep. Like, this is the dude's life. So the fact that he was able to do all that with just that says something. Like, imagine Babe Ruth with a coach that gave him nutritional guidelines and a workout program, and picture Babe Ruth but fit. Like, lean, fit, and still had the slugging power that he had, but he was quicker. Imagine that. So, yeah.
Tennis. Roger Federer.
Tennis.
In tennis, every GOAT debate revolves around the big three: Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic. There have been great champions before, but nobody has held the same dominance of the sport for so long. The three have monopolized the Grand Slams, and since 2003, when Federer won his first, they have won 55 out of the last 66 majors, which is mesmerizing.
Wow.
Of the last 16 years, Federer, Djokovic, and Nadal have spent 15 and a half,
Federer and Nadal
95% ranked world number one. Nadal is without a doubt
Federer and Nadal
king
are
of
the two
clay,
names I
winning
recognize.
12 Roland Garros titles, which is a record for a single Grand Slam tournament, and has 19 overall slams. Djokovic has 17 major titles, and Federer has 20, and that's why he is still the GOAT. Roger played probably the most beautiful tennis ever, and when he was at his peak, he was in a class of his own. Still, Fed is likely at the very sunset of his career, and Nadal and Djokovic have all the tools to surpass him in the coming years, collect more slams, and dethrone him from the GOAT status.
Okay. See, I always assumed that Federer and Nadal and them came in at the same time, so it was like a bird magic type of rivalry. But yeah, I didn't know Federer was on his way out, and Nadal he's young enough to be in a discussion to possibly pass him. You guys have to let me know the context behind this as well. Like, was there ever a period in tennis where there were a handful of players that were this dominant at the top? Like, was there ever a period where there was like 4 or 5 people that were just flat out destroying the competition? It is interesting they didn't mention women's tennis, because Serena Williams, I'm willing to guarantee, is in an argument for greatest female tennis player. And I know when you talk about like men's tennis versus women's tennis, the men's tennis automatically has an advantage, because if you take the best men's tennis player, he's probably going to beat the best women's tennis player 9 times out of 10. But as far as like just how big the gap is between number 1 and number 2, it seems to me like Serena Williams has a bigger gap than Roger Federer, because they're making it sound like Nadal is right there with him. So it's like they're rather close, whereas Serena is like head and shoulders above the next girl. So it is interesting they didn't mention Serena. Now, I know there are other players in the past. Like, would you consider Billie Jean King to be a all-time like a GOAT? I don't know. Like, for women's tennis, she definitely was. Like, she had the competition where she beat the male tennis player. I don't know what his rank was or anything like that, so I don't know exactly where she stands as far as overall competition against some of the male players, but I don't know. Like, my context around tennis is Rocky also. Like I said, this is one of them sports where I go off of name recognition. I've heard Federer, I've heard Nadal, and I've heard of the Williams sisters. And Anna Kournikova, I've heard her name. What I can remember, I don't think she was a great player, but she had name recognition. I think that was more so because she was like a model or something. I don't know. But yeah, context.
Golf. Tiger Woods. Like many other sports, golf also has a 2-person debate for the greatest of all time.
Yeah.
Tiger Woods and Jack Nicklaus. If we were comparing the two, Nicklaus definitely gets the nod at the majors, where he's the all-time leader with 18 wins. Also, he came in second additional 19 times and had a record 56 top 5 finishes. With 15 major titles, Tiger is 3 short of Jack's 18. On the other hand, Tiger is the all-time leader with 82 PGA Tour wins, and Nicklaus comes in third with 73 PGA victories. So the clincher comes down to context and dominance over the sport of golf.
Context
And that's
means
why we
everything.
chose Tiger as the GOAT. When Tiger was at his best, he played golf better than it's ever been played before. His 15 strokes margin of victory at the 2000 US Open is one of the greatest performances in the history of golf. Woods won by 11 or more strokes 4 times in his career, while Jack's best result was a 9-stroke margin. Tiger is also the only player to win 4 consecutive majors and has the lowest scoring average in PGA Tour history and the highest win percentage. If he didn't have bad luck with injuries, he probably would have exceeded Jack's 18 majors by now. If he does catch him, even the hardest Nicklaus fans will have to admit Tiger is the greatest. For us, he already is, even if he never makes another putt in his life.
Okay, see, again, that talks about context and why it's so important. Like, for example, when you compare Michael Jordan to LeBron James, some people like to point to certain statistics like, well, LeBron has more overall points than Michael Jordan does, or he went to more finals than Michael Jordan did. And it's like, for the time that Michael was active, you can take just that those 11 seasons Michael played from 84 to 93 and 96 to 98. I don't know if that's 11, but it's somewhere around there. Just those years alone, the numbers he produced was greater than any other player in NBA history. And like just how much he was able to do during that short period of time. So it's like when you talk about Jack Nicholson or Jack Nicklaus, I always confuse it if it's Jack Nicklaus or Jack Nicholson. When you compare him to Tiger Woods, yes, he had better overall numbers as far as like majors won. When you look at that period of time when Tiger was had his A game, there was no better golfer than Tiger Woods. And I'm willing to guarantee, no matter how hardcore of a golf fan you are, you got to give Tiger respect for that period in time in the 90s and early 2000s when dude was just unstoppable. Like, he made golf a mainstream sport. Golf always had like a bit of a niche thing. It's like, yeah, a lot of people played it, but nobody really bothered watching it, really. It was like one of those like rec activities. Like, there's a lot of people that probably play racquetball, but you don't watch it on damn TV. It was just a recreational thing, and Tiger made it a sports center staple. So it's like the dude was so good, he drew endorsements to golf, and now with players like Rory McIlroy and people like that, you see the sponsorship and endorsements and things going into it, and it's like, damn, Tiger transformed the sport completely. I would consider Tiger to be the greatest golfer of all time. How close it is, I think that he's a lot further apart from Jack than some people like to give him credit. Because if Tiger hadn't have gotten injured, I think that it would be safe to say he would have probably broken Jack's majors record. Now, that's speculating, and there's no guarantee that he would have won the tournaments. But given his skill set, and if he hadn't have gotten injured and gone through the scandal that he went through and stuff at the same time, I'm willing to bet that he would have broken that record. And for me, that's the one thing that keeps Jack in the discussion. Once that goes away, it's like Wayne Gretzky again. Tiger's just up there and gone. But yeah, if you guys have an opinion on a particular GOAT in a sport that you are a fan of, go in the comment section down below and let me know. Let me know about your opinions on people that aren't necessarily the GOATs. Like, if you have a list of who the greatest players of all time are, go ahead and leave them down there and explain why you have certain players on your list. If there's other people in the comment section that knows about the sport too, they're probably going to want an explanation for why you have some players on there and some players not on your list. So go ahead and give your opinions about it. I don't know. I don't really have a lot of opportunities to talk about sports outside of sports videos. So whenever I do stuff like this, My videos tend to run longer. Like this is right now I'm looking at like almost 45 minutes. My videos tend to go a little bit longer because I talk a lot about it and there's a lot I want to speak on it about. But I gotta also try to rein myself in and trying to go too deep into it. But yeah, my list of greatest of all time. I'm gonna give you this, and then I'm gonna go ahead and sign out. So, soccer. I, I mean, I still want to say Pele, but I'll go ahead and do Messi just because the dude made a good argument. Basketball, Michael Jordan, hands down. Hockey is Wayne Gretzky. Uh, Boxing is Sugar Ray Robinson. Um, Baseball, for me, I'll have Hank Aaron. Um, Let me see, what other sports was it? I'm trying to think about other sports that was mentioned in this. Uh, Basketball, boxing. Okay, well, I already said boxing. Sugar Ray Robinson. Um, MMA. I still want to say Emelianenko, but I gotta go with John Jones. If he's truly undefeated, then yeah, John Jones. Um, Football, I'm going to say Tom Brady. Jerry Rice is a very close second. I already said Hank Aaron for baseball. Tennis, eh, it depends. Again, I'd probably say Serena Williams. Now, if you're talking about like competing against each other, then I would say Federer. But as far as the gap between them and their competitors, I would have to say Serena Williams. Because she's not competing against Roger Federer. She's not competing against the men. She's competing against the women. And compared to her competitors, she is head and shoulders dominant. Like, for example, if Ronda Rousey had not have lost her fights and been exposed, like as far as her weaknesses, I would have probably had her as the greatest MMA fighter of all time. And of course, golf, Tiger Woods. So that's my list. Let me know what your opinions are in the comment section down below. I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up. This is damn near a podcast at this point. I'm gonna give you guys the deuces. I'm Devon DaVinci. Hopefully, you've been a little more enlightened. I look forward to seeing you guys in my future videos, and I am signing out. So, see you on the next video, maybe sports video. Who knows? That's it. So here's the deuces. Peace.